Welcome to the latest instalment of Close Readings. In this series, we are taking each time an individual poem, one we've chosen because it is in one way or another a political work, or a work about politics, or it has been read politically. My name is Seamus Perry, and I teach English at Balliol College in Oxford, and I'm talking to Mark Ford, poet, critic, Professor of English Literature at University College, London. And our poem today is a work first published in 1847 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning called The Runaway Slave at Pilgrim's Point. So, Mark, the political interest of this poem is fairly obvious from the beginning. It's an abolitionist poem, a poem written in the cause of the ending of slavery. So perhaps we should say something to begin with about the culture of abolitionism, or the literary culture of abolitionism.
Yes, I mean, this was for the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society, which was one of an abolitionist movement, which was developing a language which was condemning of slavery in alliance with slave narratives such as those by Frederick Douglass. And I think when you're looking at abolitionist writing, you all the time have to be very, very aware of the context in which it's being received, that the abolitionists have a strategy whereby they can present certain details, but not other details. So in many sort of slave narratives, such as, say, that of Sojourner Truth, published in 1851, the fact that she was raped is not mentioned because that would upset the white female readership that absorbed abolitionist writings. The idea was that abolitionist writings would convert middle-class women who would then convert their husbands to the cause. And that's how the kind of snooker game would go on in some ways. One ball hitting another ball, hitting another ball. So there's a sense often that the melodrama of this poem plays into, obviously, the sort of taste that Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin would capitalise on so kind of powerfully in 1852. And that becomes the best-selling book on the planet, outsells Dickens and so on. So abolitionists had to be careful about how much, about not upsetting their readership. But this poem does go right to the edge, and she called it ferocious herself. And the story it tells is one which is absolutely harrowing and had actually been told her by a cousin of hers about a Jamaican slave. Because we should say now that Elizabeth Barrett's money came from slavery, that her family had been slaveholders since 1655, and that she was the wealth of her father, Edward Barrett Moulton Barrett, who seems to me to have been an utter monster, derived from his slave plantations. Of course, 1833, the Emancipation Act meant that he had to release his slaves, so to speak, from his plantations in Jamaica. But he got £7,000 in compensation from the government. But that did mean that the Barretts had to move from their idyllic Hope End rural retreat and up to London. They moved to Wimpole Street, from which she made her famous escape with Robert.
Famous escape, absolutely.
Just before this poem was written.
So there are complications, let's say, about her relationship with the institution of slavery, aren't there? She certainly inherits quite a lot of money from her grandmother and her uncle that comes from slave labour. But at the same time, she was a very enthusiastic supporter for the Emancipation Act of 1833. And she said she was extremely glad that the slaves, she says in a rather equivocal phrase, the slaves were virtually free. This poem, however, comes out very militantly against slavery as an institution. And it does something more interesting even maybe than that, which is to try and make some sort of connection between slavery and the political institutions of the American Constitution.
Absolutely. And I think she may have been sort of got the idea of that from the name of the annual, Liberty Bell. Liberty Bell, the bell was the bell which was rung when the Declaration of Independence was read out to the people in 1776. And she goes back to the the Mayflower Pilgrims who arrive in 1620 at Plymouth Rock. So famously at Plymouth Rock, the Mayflower arrives with the first colonizers, or however you want to put it. But they were. She presents them in the first stanza as kind of seeking liberty, where they were seeking kind of religious freedom away from the perils of creeping Catholicism as they saw it.
The established church.
And the
so on.
established
Yes,
church.
exactly.
And perhaps somewhat implausibly, this slave has escaped from the South and made her way all the way to Massachusetts, to Pilgrim, to the point. So again, the theatricality of it is foregrounded by its title and its concept, that this slave has made her way to the point where the Mayflower landed, and at this moment the slave hounders, the catchers are on her trail.
Yeah.
And this is the speech she gives just before they seize her and kill her. I think the sense is that they stone her at the end.
Yeah, that's something like that is implied, isn't it? Yes, it's worth looking at that first verse, isn't it? Because it does introduce. It's one of these very deftly sort of choreographed poems, isn't it, which turns around a number of words that get reiterated and a number of ideas or images that get repeated throughout. I stand on the mark beside the shore of the first white pilgrim's bended knee, where exile turned to ancestor and God was thanked for liberty. I have run through the night, my skin is as dark, I bend my knee down on this mark, I look on the sky and the sea. So, as you say, the Pilgrim Fathers are associated with an idea of liberty, although actually the idea of liberty that they were interested in was nothing much to do with the 19th century liberal idea of individual political liberty, which is the kind of conflation that she's rather deftly making. And by bending my knee down on this mark, she's absolutely pressing a button, isn't she? An iconic representation of the slave, as in Wedgwood's famous cameo of the slave bending his knee. Am I not a man and a brother? So, I mean, the first little verse is doing quite a lot of work, setting up a kind of white, dark antithesis, also associating with the sky and the sea a kind of absolute freedom which has lost any kind of human implication or imprisonment. And it's also dramatic. That's an important thing for us to note, isn't it? She's writing a dramatic monologue, a little bit like the sort of thing that Robert Browning might be writing.
Yes, and she was actually writing it on honeymoon, having escaped herself from Edward Barrett Moulton Barrett, who then cut her off without a penny and returned all her letters and never spoke to her again. He didn't want any of his children to marry, and any who did got the same treatment. So, and it's been thought that it may have been because it was fear of some kind of miscegenation had happened on the Jamaican plantations, and one of these children that his children might give birth to would have skin that wasn't completely white. So the anxiety of racial miscegenation kind of stalks the white imagination, and as in much abolitionist writing, the hypocrisy of the slave owners is something that is kind of implicit throughout the poem, that they say they believe in liberty. Well, they don't. That the keeping of slaves is in conflict, with the notion of religious liberty as it was used, as it was figured in writings about the Puritans of the 17th century, but also in terms of the Constitution. And of course, Jefferson and Washington had slaves and so on. So there's a sense in which even at the founding moment, the Constitution is only speaking for the white populace. And by 1830s, 1840s, that rhetoric was being used by abolitionists to expose the hypocrisy of all those who are in favour of slavery. But what she's doing as well is transforming it or displacing it from Jamaica to America, which is a kind of interesting move that she's making. Obviously, she's writing for an American publication, but her involvement with slavery was with Jamaica, and that's then transposed to America. A little bit, perhaps, the way that Conrad in Heart of Darkness attacked Belgium imperialists rather than British imperialists. But the story that it tells of a woman who murders her own child is pretty extreme for the time. It's been made famous in our time by Toni Morrison's Beloved, which has that as the central Gothic element in it. But this story, which was a true story that she was told by her Jamaican cousin, is and the reason she does is because she's been raped by her master. It's implied she's been gang raped almost by a whole kind of team of the plantation owners, and she cannot bear her white child.
And as you say, she knows she's writing a work that is going to be difficult. She knows she's writing something that is, emotionally problematic, doesn't she? She tells Mary Russell Mitford, "Nobody will print it, I am certain, because I could not help making it bitter." So there's a deliberate kind of moral astringency and awfulness that she's calculating. If you enjoyed this episode, please do try signing up to the Close Reading subscription. You can sign up directly in Apple Podcasts or in other podcast apps. Just follow the links in the description.